Everybody has a story, and everybody's story matters to God, and nobody gets quite the story that they want. So today, the invitation is, remember other people's story. Remember the miracle that everybody that you see carries wounds and scars and has hopes and dreams and fears that are every bit as deep and every bit as important to God as you do. Today, for you and me, let's be more interested in learning other people's story than trying to get them to learn our story, and caring about other people's story than we are in trying to get them to care about ours. And then our heart grows. And I'll tell you an example of this, and then try to summarize this in a way that communicates something of the greatness and the goodness of God and why there are so many stories that are all connected to His one grand story. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois. My dad's family was Swedish. Rockford was kind of a Swedish town. My grandfather, Albin, was in his mid-40s by the time my dad was born, so he was quite old by the time I got to know him. He was kind of a gruff character. Swedes tend to be not real emotionally expressive anyway. I don't think my dad ever heard his father say, "I love you," to my grandmother or to my dad. When he wanted to be close with us and we were little kids, the way that he would do that is he would pull us to himself and then rub our little soft faces against his face. And of course that meant touch, so that's kind of a good thing. But it was whiskers, so it hurt. It was like sandpaper. That's Swedish emotional life. Come here and I will give you affection and be close to you, but it's going to hurt. There's going to be a little price to pay. And it was a hard thing to get to know him well. And what's quite extraordinary is the deepest parts of his story I would not come to know until after he died. He died a year or so before I got married. And when Nancy and I got married, we spent a year living in Scotland where I was studying. Nancy was working as a maid, made enough money for us to travel on a Euro pass for a couple of months after that. And we ended up in Sweden and stayed with Siri, who is my father's first cousin and the daughter of my grandfather, Albin's sister, Tekla. And she took us to the parish church that my grandfather's family had attended when he was growing up. And there I learned his story. His mom and dad got married when his mom was pregnant with that couple's second child. So, as you might imagine, more than 100 years ago in that Swedish village, that would have been quite a scandalous thing. And then she ended up having more children than she wanted. His mom died when Albin was only 8, and she was not buried inside the church cemetery. And the reason for that, this is all in the parish records, the reason for that was because she had ingested sulfur, and that was either an attempted suicide or a kind of a folk attempt at an abortion. And either way, the church said, because of that, she would not be allowed to be buried within the cemetery grounds. So my grandfather, when he was 8 years old, could not go to visit his mom's grave. His dad remarried when Albin was 14, remarried the wife, the sister of his first wife, and she turned out to have very severe emotional health issues. Like, for example, Tekla, the mom of the cousin that we got to meet when she was a little girl, would be charged to take the cows out to pasture and then bring them back home. If she didn't bring them back home on time, then she would have to take them out all over again. The killer was she wasn't allowed to have a watch or a clock with her. She had to keep time by the trains going by, so if the trains were off schedule, she was in big trouble. The stepmother covered up all the mirrors in the house, again, because of emotional health issues. 2 weeks after my great-grandfather married the stepmom, who was also the aunt, he died of a heart attack. And so as a 14-year-old boy, my grandfather had lost his mom and had lost his dad and was being raised by an insane stepmother who did not want him there. And all of that would have wounded his heart so deeply. But we did not know his story. My dad did not know that story. And when I think about what my grandfather had to deal with and how much better he did as a dad and a person that what it was that he was received, it's really quite heroic. But because I didn't know his story, I didn't know. Everybody has a story. Everybody that you and I walk past, those faces, we often assume, in a sense, they're just bit characters in my story. And Elizabeth Stump writes about this in her book, Wandering in Darkness, when she's talking about Job. And it's a profound glimpse at what a great God is and what's actually going on in our world. She writes about how, in the beginning of the book, if you've read it, it talks about God's interaction with Satan. And actually, she writes about how God cares about Satan. When he asks him, where have you been? It's an invitation for Satan to consider. God loves all of his creatures, including the Satan God cannot love. And so if you read that, you know, part of what's going on is God uses Job as an attempt to teach Satan there is such a thing as loyalty and faithfulness and goodness and covenant love. And at first, it looks like Job is just being used as a pawn in the story of Satan. But Eleanor Stump goes on, tucked within the overarching story of Satan's relationship with God is the story that's focused on Job. With regard to that story, not considered as a detail in Satan's story, which it is, but as its own whole story, namely the story of Job's life, which it also is, then Job is the primary beneficiary of the events that are involved in his suffering. That is because the same acts on God's part designed to teach Satan that Satan's cynical view of the world is wrong make Job first a cultural ideal and then an exemplar of human greatness. So although on the face of it, Job is just an incidental part in the story of Satan's relationships with God, nonetheless, in the story which is the narrative of Job's life, that story, God is concerned to deal with Job in a way that seeks Job's good, primarily, and aims to draw Job closer to God if Job stands steadfast. In fact, in the embedded story focused on Job, God doesn't simply stand by to see whether or not Job will be steadfast. Rather, God intervenes to help Job. God shows up and talks to Job. And she notes how it's that way in the story after story after story in the Bible. They focus on a particular person. And so there'll be other people that often look like supporting actors. I used to be troubled by the story of Job's children because they die and it looks like they're just pawns in there. But Eleanor Stump talks about, she uses the image of a fractal in mathematics. It's a graph where each little part of it, if it's reproduced, mirrors exactly the larger graph. Or also the image of those little Russian dolls that get nested in each other. So you take off one doll and there's another doll that looks just like it and another one and another one. In every story, we are impacting other people. We are bit actors in their stories. We can influence them for good or for ill, but then we're all living in our lives and God is using other people in our lives. So each of Job's children could have been the object of a second story, of a separate story where they too are the object of God's love. Everybody has a story. Nobody is a pawn. And I dare not treat other people as just bit characters in my story. Sometimes a great athlete will talk about lesser athletes on the team as my supporting cast. But what Eleanor Stump is talking about is in the Bible, there is no such thing as a supporting cast. We are all part of the supporting cast, and we are all the objects of a story. Everybody has a story. So today, here to net it out, the ABCs of relationship. My wife Nancy will hate this. She hates acronyms and alliteration, and so too bad. ABC, A is for ask. Ask people questions about their story, about their life, about what they hope for, where they're coming from. My wife is actually a master at this one. I marvel at. Often it's the second question. You ask somebody a question, how are you doing? What are you hoping for? What do you see down the road? And then you watch how they respond, and then you follow up with a question that begins to open the door. Ask, and then ABC's BC. Be curious. Just be curious. Your heart, my heart will grow more when we are curious about other people's stories than when we try to get other people to be curious about our stories. It is a mysterious and wonderful and transcendent thought to realize As deep as your own awareness is, and as much as your story matters to you, so it is with each person. And that is because everybody is beloved by God, and everybody's story matters to God. So today, be interested in other people's story. And by the way, as a result, your own story will be enlarged and ennobled.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any future teachings from John Ortberg here at Become New. My name's Tim, and I'm a part of the team here. This series is all about stories. Everybody has a story, and everybody's story matters. And we want to know about your story, whether it's a story of coming to faith or a story of spiritual growth. Whatever it is, we're here for you. You can email that to us at connect@becomenew.com, or you can text it to us. You can also sign up for daily reminders whenever we drop a new video via text by texting the word BECOME to the number 855-888-0444. You can also send us prayer requests there. There's a team of us that meet to pray each weekday for viewers just like yourself. If you'd like to receive the emails that go along with each video, be sure to check that out at becomenew.com/subscribe. More than a video to watch, this is really a community to belong to, and we're so glad that you're a part of it. We'll catch you next time.